Ariel Benavidez. Welcome today. It's such a pleasure to have you here to talk about your journey. And the special, the most special thing that we're going to talk about that I hear of speaking to you is how you used tools that you had when you didn't even realize that you had them. How powerful that is. And how you use the art of journaling to get you through a starting point with no training on how to journalize and how to journal to breaking through like multiple levels of yourself. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Excited to be here.
Thank you. One of the reasons we said we'd want to talk to Ari is because I don't really think that you need to look at somebody who is, the founder of some Fortune company or whatever, because sometimes they're just not relatable. We're everyday people, right? And sometimes when others look at those personas, there is this, I would call a misconception that they are all these things that I am not. So therefore, when they talk about their story of trial and falling down and getting up, they somehow have this thing, they're wired a certain way that I'm not, so forget it. So they bow out of the exercise. What I like about Ari is like, you're so down to earth, right? Come on, yes?
Definitely.
Right? You could say that, right? So you're so down to earth, but you're doing amazing things like up here. And so I'd love to be able to just share some of that.
Sure.
And what I love about the way you do it is you just kind of look at it like, I wouldn't say you're even trying to be humble. You're like, yeah, this is just all I did. And you also talk about how you did things that didn't work. Now, you just talked about earlier on about how you could take until a certain very advanced phase in life to figure this stuff out. And it's not like we can say we've figured it out, nor would you say that yourself. But it's interesting, you have figured some things out, right? When you look at a previous iteration or version of yourself, you're able to just kind of stand outside of yourself and look at that and go, yeah, there it was. So give us an instance, right? Like that you found that you can recall that you would say, yeah, I was really struggling with this. Let's start with that.
Sure.
Do you remember one that comes to mind?
Yeah, even more so than the specific example of what I was struggling with. When you were speaking earlier about that moment of choice, a very clear memory came up for me. And I believe I was about 21 years old. And I had that moment. I remember I was living with my brother at the time, and I was in my bedroom. And this thought crossed my mind where I just felt so overwhelmed with life and overwhelmed with the poor choices, or rather the lack of choices that I've made in my life throughout, my early teens, when you started developing awareness of the ability to make choice. And I reached a point where the way it came to me was this very clear sentence where it was, I don't know what it is that I want to do, but I know I don't want to do nothing. And it just like repeated, and like it echoed in my mind, like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I know I don't want to do nothing. And that's kind of like where that choice took place, where I was like, okay, you don't want to do nothing. What are some things that you want to do? And the way that journey kind of started for me was very practical. So I was like, I don't know what it is I want to do. So let me learn about things that will be applicable in pretty much everything.
So I just find this so interesting. So you start there. I want to actually start a little bit before that, because you said to yourself, I don't want to do nothing, which suggests to me that you thought you were doing nothing at that point.
Yeah.
What made you think at 21 that you thought you were doing nothing? What made you feel that?
I was definitely very self-critical of myself at that age. And the way that I felt that I was doing nothing is because when I would examine my life, I would try to understand, or I would try to make my life fit in a box of marketable skills.
Marketable skills.
And it was this idea that I have nothing to barter with.
What made you think that you had nothing to barter with?
Because I feel like if I were to go to a convention or some sort of gathering and people would go, oh, what do you do?
Okay.
I don't really know. I don't have anything to offer you. That's what it felt like at the time. Like there was things that I did that I enjoyed, but it didn't feel like any of it was marketable. I couldn't offer you the things that I was doing as a transaction for something that you would do for me in return. And so there's that feeling of low value because I had nothing that I could give you in exchange for what you had to offer.
What would you say that any part of this felt relative to others? So, when you say low value or marketable, was there this feeling that you might have been, like as you're being critical of yourself, you're also observing others and saying,
oh yeah,
oh, that person looks very marketable because they seem to have value
100%.
because they have these things, which I apparently don't have.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's not just us, right? It's like this relative.
We're socialized that construct, right? Of comparing and achieving and what the status looks like. Oh, you have a university degree? Check. You have this? Check.
Yeah, exactly.
So what were those things?
Yeah, like what Tree was saying, like you're always swimming in some sort of pool. Right. And it's all about perspective depending on what pool you're in at that time. And at that time, I was knee deep in self-development. So it was like Tony Robbins and a bunch of other gurus and sales experts and all these things. And I was just like examining their lives and reading their books and watching their videos and seeing all these things that they've done for themselves. And then there's just me sitting in my brother's bedroom, hopping from part-time job to part-time job, feeling like I wasn't developing any hard skills or even soft skills. I didn't feel like I was cultivating anything. A lot of self-sabotage or the critic within me, a lot of the stuff that it was saying is that I couldn't stick to anything, that I would be intrigued. I'm a fast learner, so I get through the first learning curve really quickly, but then I get stuck at that first plateau. I never push myself to actually become an expert in anything. And so then I would hop around from thing to thing and just always feel like I wasn't breaking through in anything.
So can we now go even further back?
Sure.
So what's interesting is that at 21, you have this moment, right? You start reflecting. Before that, there's this building up of what's relative, of what value is. We talked about that, like how we socialize it. What's interesting though is I find that when you go further back, because I've had the same sort of thing happen, but at some point in time, we thought we were doing all right.
Oh yeah.
Can we go back to that point
Sure.
where we thought you think, hey, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
What? Because that came even before.
Yeah.
So how can you go from doing great to thinking you're doing nothing to thinking you got to do something? Wait.
Yeah.
Wait, let's go back to the part that we thought where we were doing great.
Yeah.
And I want to understand that because when you look back on it, we weren't doing great according to the 21-year-old version.
Yeah.
So where did it start further back where you figured, hey, I'm doing just fine?
Yeah.
What was that version of you saying?
Sure. Yeah. I think when you're, at least my experience was when you're in it, you don't really realize that you're in it. And so it was just flowing.
Right.
And for me, that was like high school, high school years. It was just, everything was great.
Great.
Yeah. I was popular to a degree in the sense where I connected with everyone. I wasn't really part of a specific group, but I had no problems with anyone, and I was able to just jump into any group at the lunch table and just be like, hey, what are you guys doing today, type of thing. So that felt cool. Had the girl, which was awesome. Yeah, there's an acceptance, and it was an ease of acceptance. There was never a nervousness of me approaching a lunch group that I've never really interacted with before.
Okay.
It was just very easy for me to go, hey, I sat beside you in this class, and I'd go talk to him and all of his friends at that table, and then I'd spend the whole lunch there,
right,
not nervous in the slightest, just kind of shooting the shit, talking back and forth and all that kind of stuff, which was great.
Right.
Had the girl, which was awesome too, right? Made a strong connection with someone. We dated from, I believe we started in grade 10 until after high school as well. So there's just that steady relationship all the way through. Family was doing really well. My dad has a painting business, and things were going really well in the business, so money was never really a thing that crossed my mind during those ages. So everything was going well in the social aspect, the personal aspect, the relationship, and the family aspect. Everything was kind of flowing well. But then after high school, a lot of those things started to deteriorate, some of them at the same time and right on top of each other. My relationship got really rocky. My dad's business started to collapse. I started not socializing. I started becoming more introverted and kind of like shutting myself off from everyone and everything. And when I broke down those three things, the family, the social, and the relationship, all I was left with was like me and myself. And then it just became a parade of self-berating, just like self-sabotage. Oh, you're not this, you're not good enough, you couldn't maintain the relationship, you come from a family of failures, and so on and so forth. And just like, your friends don't want to hang out with you anymore. And just like a lot of that self-sabotage just started to come on. And it's one of those things like you don't realize that it's happening, but you kind of see it build up over time. What's funny, I always have this one very clear example in regards to the family business that made me feel poor. And it was like so clear of a transition for me because my family would always buy Wonder Bread. And then one day I opened the fridge and there's no more Wonder Bread. It was like this no-name bread. And I remember grabbing the loaf and just like looking at it. And it was just like, okay, like this is life now. Like this is where I'm at in life right now. And it was just like really interesting moment at that time. And I feel like I make it a bigger moment as I think back to it. Maybe it wasn't this big when I was actually doing it, but it definitely was enough to be anchored into something.
The thing that comes out for me when I'm hearing what you're saying is you're the same person through all of those stages.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
But your worth and your perception of worth of yourself shifts based on external circumstances. So I guess for me is like what life has storms that's going to happen around us, right? So the thing of it is we are always intrinsically these certain things. We're always like kind and smart or generous or funny or whatever. Those are really the core values. The other stuff is superfluous. Like it's superficial. It's not, money is not a real thing. The currency that comes with quote unquote education is not a real thing, even though we're in a 3D kind of world. So I guess the issue or the question would be, looking at it through that lens or that context would be, how has that shifted for you in the sense that your worth, or is it shifted? Is your worth something that is stable, like as you go through life's experiences? Because it was such a shift for you there where your worth, which is always a constant and it's always the same, but in your perspective, it went down as those external things came on you.
Yeah. So looking back on it now, I could confidently say that, the worth is consistent. The way I see it, from the day you're born to the day you die, there's no such thing as improving the self. All there is really actualizing the potential that has always existed within you. So I see that now. At the time, I didn't see that.
So what helped you see that?
Just a lot of time in meditation, probably spending all that time by myself, and journaling was a big factor in that as well, because when I first started journaling, it was out of pain and a lot of emotion. So I would write very emotionally, and I would skew things intentionally in my writing to make it more grandiose, right? To make it more emotional or more powerful or whatever it was. And slowly over years, by continuously writing, that feeling of needing to be grandiose would start to settle down, and I would journal in a way that was more concrete and more reflective. It's kind of like with a mirror. It started as a funhouse mirror where I was warping everything, and slowly over time the mirror started to regulate itself and started to give me more of a clear reflection in that. But at that time, I feel what I was experiencing with that shift, you use the metaphor of the storm, I feel like that was the first storm I've ever really been in. I came from a really good childhood. I never really had any issues growing up. My parents always provided for me. My family was always strong. I mean, we lived, I think it was about 7 of us in a household, because my aunt and uncle and their kids lived with us. So there's always like a really strong family connection. And through that connection, I was very comfortable socializing with others, because I was always surrounded by people. And so socializing with others was no problem for me. And so I feel like it was when all those things started to collapse at that age, I had attachment to those things. I was those things at that time. And so I feel like that's what's kind of like that necessary journey of realizing you're not those things. That's not who you are. Those are extensions and maybe even expressions of who you are, but they're not you at the core central version of what you're capable of.
You remember that, what was it, a Jodie Foster movie called Contact or something?
Yeah,
Remember
with
that?
the aliens.
With the alien?
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about the alien thing, but yeah, it was alien stuff. But what really stands out to me, that movie, is when she's sitting in front of like this panel in the end describing her experience. And great acting at this one moment where she gives a speech and she talks about, if we only realized, like by looking at this universe and our place in it, how simultaneously we are both so special and so insignificant
Yeah.
at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And just keeping that
Duality.
in just perfect balance, we will understand. What's interesting as I hear you talk about, that's what it reminds me of, because in high school, the insignificant part hasn't kicked in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the how special I am.
Yeah.
I'm part of this group, I'm part of that group, I have all these friends, this girl, blah, 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 all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you cannot be complete without realizing how insignificant we are at the exact same time. You talk about actualization, I think there's nothing more than that in actualization. Like the perfect understanding of these two aspects of what we are. What I find is that I've gone through it, you've gone through it, you've gone through it. Yeah. It's the exact same thing. And everybody, it seems, doesn't just go through it accidentally. It's like we must go through this to be able to finish. And so when we look back at when the 21-year-old or what you are now, I keep thinking you're 21, like you're so young. So it's like everybody looks young to me. So.
I'm not 21 anymore.
No, I know.
So.
I think you could pass as 21.
Maybe if I shave.
No, you got the look, man. You got this like very like young look. So it's great. So my point for bringing it up is you can look back on it now. But I really want you to stay in that when I was 18, because I think a lot of the times when we're going through what we're going through, whether it's at 21 or 25 or 30 or 40, it starts like that learning, that ingraining, the accepting of the relative worth of who we are starts way earlier on. That's why I like spending that time in that zone to understand, because that's where some of our beliefs or what we call our sacreds are built. And you had everything going for you, yet it seems like you were, according to your 21-year-old version, doing nothing.
Yeah.
So while we're on this high, we're actually doing nothing. Is that even a possibility?
Yeah.
Would you actually go back to that 18-year-old and be like, dude, you're doing nothing actually?
Yeah.
Is that how you would say it?
No,
exactly.
No, not quite, quite. Like what's coming up for me now, I feel the best way to describe my situation at that time is I was in the optimal environment.
Okay.
So the environment was stable, it was safe, comfortable, abundant, lots of opportunity for relationships and all that kind of stuff. Very good in that sense. But what I feel was that I was lacking was a tool set. And so although my environment was safe and all those great things, there was no necessity for me to develop any tools. And then so when all those storms started to come in and I had to deal with all these emotions and, real life changes, like our house was almost paid off. We were like, I think down to $100,000 of the mortgage. And within, I believe it was about 4 years, we were back up to $700,000 because my dad wasn't willing to adapt. He worked so hard to build a business and create this life for us in Canada that when the 2008 recession hit, he refused to accept it and refused to adapt and slowly kept putting us more and more debt because he wouldn't adjust the lifestyle. And
he would say, look, I got us this far, so trust me.
Exactly.
Right? I've been there. I can understand that exactly.
Yeah.
And when he would look back on it, it would look like I wasn't adapting, but at that moment, it'd be like, but I am resilient.
I'm gonna get through this.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I call it like your blessing is your curse.
Yeah.
But in terms of yourself now, as you're going through this, now you come to this awareness, and you just said something really interesting to me. You said you didn't think now, looking back, that you had the tools.
The tools, yeah, the emotional
And it's
tools.
funny when we talk about we're talking about building or training or whatever, learning. It's getting tools.
Yeah.
But whoever thinks they're going to need that tool because it hasn't presented
Until
itself
you need
yet.
it.
So you're like, why would I need this? How many times have people in high school said, where am I ever going to use this?
Yeah.
I don't need this because I never actually faced that. And so that's one thing I think is an important point to highlight is that often we get opportunities coming our way to get tools, to learn stuff, but we pass.
Yeah.
I think that's a choice we need to take accountability for, don't you think?
Yeah, and reflecting on what you're saying through my perspective is I had a very different upbringing than him.
Okay.
And I had to learn tools really, really early, right? So it's kind of like I wouldn't take that away.
So which one was abundant? The one who had it? And
it's all about it's all about perception of it, because I feel at 21, in context of all the adverse experiences I had way more tools than your 21-year-old version of yourself. And I think sometimes when we have these illusions of security, quote unquote, such as, stable family, income, supportive, these are all great things, but they give an illusion to us that we have to achieve that, or that's what happiness
or
is.
that it'll be there forever,
or we don't need to worry
forever. Or we're attaching we're so attached to these things, right? So when you lose a house, or you lose a family member, you lose jobs, or whatever it is,
Wonder Bread.
Or the Wonder Bread.
I love that.
It's just like, and meanwhile in my head I'm like, Wonder Bread's not even good bread.
That's going to be a chapter in the book. It's going to be titled Wonder Bread.
Yeah.
You write your story.
But
the Wonder Bread chapter.
But it's just like you're raised in, compared to me, raised in a situation of privilege, right? And but privilege doesn't always beget how you feel or gives you the opportunities or the tools. That's the thing. It's always an internal. Yeah. It's always an internal thing. Yeah. Which is just so wild. That's why the mirror always comes back to us all the time.
Well,
right?
Again, why I love your story is because some people would say by 21, even just like, you're late to the game. Right? And then did you feel that all of a sudden that, I'm out of high school, now I gotta, talk about that now, because that is also, it how do you say it? Like it accelerates the fall down. Yeah. It gets deeper now.
Because you're comparing more too,
Because now you're like, I don't have it, and I wasted the opportunity. And you talk about that in your writing probably. And then the realization makes it even worse because of how we're dealing with it, right? Yeah. I'm late now. And then there's this feeling of like, uh-oh, and the panic starts setting in. Was there any of that going on, or was it just like an objective moment?
No, that was definitely going on. I think one of the reasons that was going on is there's a bit of an age gap between me and my parents. I was born when my dad was 39 and my mom was 36. And so as I started hitting my teenage years, they were like well into their 50s and 60s. 50s and 60s. And so such different generational gap and different mindset that like right out of high school, you're supposed to be working. Like you're supposed to like dive right in. And they understood the importance of school. So it's like, if you're not working, you got to go to school. And so I told my mom that I remember having this conversation with my parents. I wanted to take the first year off. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had no clue. This was like when all that stuff really started to kind of like tumble on me. And I didn't have the tools to sit with myself and process things and make decisions under pressure. And it was just like, I genuinely don't know what I want to do. I feel like if I go to school right now, I'm going to be wasting my time and I'm going to be wasting my money. I have two older siblings. My brother never went to college and my sister went for like a 1-year program. And so my parents were terrified that if I don't go to college now, I'm never going to go. And so this is where the tool of standing up for yourself would have been good, to just have an honest conversation with them and be like, hey, if I do this now, it's not going to go well. Just trust me and give me the space. But at the time, I was more accommodating to them. They've given me so much. I didn't want to upset them. So I agreed to go to school.
Which they saw as like a way to build up your tools.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And it ended up just being a waste of a year. I ended up dropping out halfway through the second semester. And my professors were calling me. They're like, dude, like, you're almost there. Just complete the year.
Yeah.
And there was just such a huge disconnect with me from the structure of school and the programming and all that stuff that was going on there that I just couldn't force myself to do it. I couldn't make myself sit through it. And ended up dropping out. And then I finally got to take that year off, which I feel like in that year, that's where a lot of this growth started to take place. Because it was like finally my life feels like my own. You know, finally these are my decisions that I'm making now.
So that's the next kind of thing I'd really like to kind of peel back a little more and understand, right? So in this year, so you're around 21 now.
This would have been like 1920.
Okay, 1920.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where it started happening.
Yeah.
And you finally feel like you got the space, and now you're kind of owning your decision, owning your time,
yeah,
owning your life and your space again.
Yeah.
And you're your own person.
Yeah.
So you feel that was important to you for you to start actually getting clarity and knowing whether it was your decision or somebody else's decision.
It allowed me to know where I stood. Right? It allowed me to know how capable I am of standing on my own 2 feet. And it was also when I realized that I sucked at it. I was just terrible time management, terrible self-accountability, and all these things. I realized like, wow, like I can't manage myself. I really can't manage myself. I can't hold myself accountable. It's a struggle for me to be accountable to others. So like all these realizations about myself started to come through. And of course, like I said, through the journaling, there was a lot of self-berating. I would exaggerate these things to make them more poetic in a sense.
What got you to start thinking about journalizing?
It was the breakup. It was the breakup with my partner that I was dating in high school. We broke up maybe a year, 2 years after high school.
So she breaks up with you. She says you should start a journal.
It's such a mess. I can't even
like that.
No.
Okay,
it's such a messy breakup. We dragged it out for basically 2 years.
Yeah. What I want to understand is that where did this idea come from?
Just necessity.
No, how did you learn about journaling as a tool?
Yeah,
as an
like all of a sudden one day, that's it.
Just poetry, yeah. Okay. There's a bit more clarity now. It was a tool of manipulation in the beginning, and I was writing poetry to manipulate my ex-partner into loving me again. I would try to convince her that I'm still worthy of her love, and I would use poetry to do that.
Okay. How does that morph into journalizing?
It felt good.
Making the connection.
It felt good to express myself onto a page, and though obviously the attempts didn't work, we're not together, obviously. But there was a certain sense of release that I experienced while writing, and even though it was interesting because even though it wasn't accepted, I still felt good about the experience, and like I created this, I made this with my own 2 hands and my mind, and
So your focus started shifting.
Yeah.
From her, the groups of people, the debt of your family or whatever, the Wonder Bread, to now you.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that's called reflection? I guess the beginning of it?
The beginning of self-reflection, yeah.
So it seems to be like this constant, I keep hearing it. It's like when we hear about stories of others and these expressions of helplessness and despair, it's always, I find, in relative senses. And as soon as people start just reflecting, just on themselves, even though they might be really harsh on themselves. Yeah. That's where it starts. Yeah. Right?
Oh yeah.
It's like the slap and then the kiss, right? Yeah. Or whichever order.
Yeah.
But when we start doing that, as imperfect as we might be in doing it, like you didn't go look up how to journalize.
No.
You just started writing.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So the accountability is always interesting to me because many people lack it, and it's always a work in progress for those of us that have awareness of it, right? So, like, what would be the epiphanies of accountability? Because when I think of accountability, I think of, okay, what am I bringing to the table that could potentially bias or put a lens on this situation that I need to hold myself accountable for? Like if I have an anger management trigger, or if I know certain situations are going to activate me, then I'm accountable to keep those biases and judgments in check so they're not then projected onto others. So what's your experience with that concept, or do you even identify with that kind of process of accountability, or does it mean something different for you?
I think it was all internal of an experience of accountability. It was never so much about me being accountable to others or family or community. It was always about being accountable to myself. So I think it would be more accurate to rather say accountability, but authenticity. It was more about being authentically to who I am, despite what my family wanted and despite what people thought of me.
Okay.
And so that was the experience through the writing, was trying to find that authentic self. And when it started, it was like a dam breaking down. So like in the beginning, there's just like this huge rush of emotion. And so, like I said, it started with poetry, just like poem after poem, multiple times a day. I would just be writing multiple poems. And then slowly over time, it morphed into like actual analysis of my life and of my, how did today go? What are the things I didn't like about my actions? How could I improve that?
Did you read up on how to do this, or did you just do it?
Just slowly over time. It wasn't with the intention of like, I want to improve my journaling skills, but it was through that expression of writing, I would eventually start reading books as well. And some of those books would talk about journaling and the style of journaling. So like the first thing that comes to mind now is Stoicism, like Marcus Aurelius and his style of journaling, which was just very much, he would sit down and just like critique his day. And he would do it as objectively as he could. Now, of course, he's a very like stark example, but I took some of those skills, or at least those ideas, and kind of dropped them into the pot and allowed them to brew and make them into my own to a degree.
That's what I love about what you're saying, is that without any tools,
Mm-hmm.
you acknowledge that,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to develop yourself,
Mm-hmm.
just yourself.
Yeah.
And when it occurred to you, you could read up on a book
Yeah.
on Marcus Aurelius or whoever you wanted,
Yeah.
and you could take from wherever you wanted, and in your way made up your own concoction
Yeah.
of how to journalize.
Yeah.
I think the essence of like the beginnings is right there. That's where you start, of course, and it makes sense why you start there.
Yeah.
So that starts opening doors now for you, right? Like opening doors in terms of now your perceptions,
Yeah.
Self-expression is so
Yourself.
big for that, right?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so at what point in time do you feel like it started? I don't like asking about how long it takes, because everybody I think has their own pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to note for me that it actually doesn't take a long time before when you look back on it, from the chaos writing, the brain dump,
Oh yeah.
to actually having some structure,
Yeah.
to now actually making it constructive.
Yeah.
Did you find that in your journalizing, you started going through these phases?
Oh, 100%.
And then started going from journalizing to then planning ahead? Did that ever start happening?
Not quite at the planning stage yet, I'd say that. But all these realizations that you just kind of listed and described, they would come to me not through the process of writing, but through the reviewing of my journals. So
Okay.
there'd be times where like I was just like struggling emotionally, just having a hard time. I was down on myself. And for whatever reason, I was drawn to open up old journals and just kind of like see what I was writing about at the time. And there's a spectrum of experiences, because it was interesting to see how far I've come. And like, and then I would read a little bit about my journal, and that would inspire new things for me to write. Because I remember very clearly, if you look at like my first journal or two, they're scribbles. And a year or so later, when I recognized that, what I journaled about is how I wrote that way intentionally because I was scared of how people would interpret my thoughts. And I wanted them to be as close to illegible as possible, because I don't want people to know how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. And then because of that, I would read some things, and some things I couldn't understand because I wrote them in such a mess. I was like, this could be something, I can't even reflect. This could have been something great.
So when you were writing,
Mm-hmm.
you had did it occur to you while you were writing that the future version of yourself is going to look back on this, or were you just writing?
Just writing.
Exactly.
Just writing.
Right? Otherwise, you would have made it more understandable to the guy in the future looking back on this.
Yeah.
But it's a message in a bottle to yourself in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing this not even realizing it.
Yeah.
That's what I love about the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like how we are, that's what I keep saying to people, like we're destined to succeed. Because look at how you self-check, how you
Mm-hmm.
self-correct.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of saying to yourself that you're doing nothing and have nothing,
Yeah.
you have something,
Yeah.
even when you said you have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, think about that again. So if I were to ask you again, right, did you really actually have nothing?
Mm-hmm. No.
That's the crazy part.
It's the lie we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yet it was so real to you right now
Oh, yeah.
that I have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been goofing around. I don't know where I want to go.
Yeah.
But you had all this, the tools
Mm-hmm.
inside of you all this time. And it's saying to yourself that you don't have it that actually started bringing it to the surface.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Not
Out
even-
of necessity, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, yeah, discomfort.
Yeah.
Can
And
push you
discomfort.
sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
that's no, go on.
I
I
was
just
just
thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah,
for me
it
to-
is
like,
inter-
you said you
Mhm.
had nothing, and
You've
had
got this tool. And you said you were looking at the writings to bring out your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who's been on the journey of authentic self has a meandering path.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're looking at the perception or looking at this through the perspective of an authentic self, what were the exercises or actions that you took? And they're likely not cognizant. They're likely just things that you, they may have been cognizant, but they're not always cognizant. So
Mhm.
what would be things that you would have done to invite more that aligns with your authentic self? And how does that translate into your relationships? Because you said you have very different viewpoints than your parents. I think most of us do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of coexisting with people who are not aligned with what you find as authentically resonating with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you create for yourself in terms of your lived opportunities or your life experiences that you are inviting? What is aligning? Because if we're not in alignment or authentic, then we're going to repeat the same patterns and we're going to have the same pitfalls. So
Mm-hmm.
I know it was a really roundabout question, but like
Summarize it for me.
where your authentic self, like where talk to about that journey and how to bring what aligns and the challenges with that. It could be with your family, it could be with friends, it could be with occupations, partners, whatever, because being authentic to who you are is going to be at the core of everything that will help you feel successful or help reinforce your feelings of self-worth, right? Because then you're not always denying yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So the journal was the seedling of my authentic self. It was a space where there was never a thought of anyone ever reading these pages. And so it allowed me to fully express whatever I was feeling at the time. And sometimes things were very, grand and just like very uplifting. And sometimes things were really dark and scary and, rancid even at times, some of the thoughts that would come through my mind. But there's just the relationship with the journal that it never felt judged in any shape or form. And even reflecting on my own journals, I never judged myself, which is something I'm realizing now as I say it, which is such an interesting thing because I spent so much time judging myself. But when I would write about that self-judgment and then I would read it, I wouldn't judge the judgment. It would just be what it is. And it's like, wow, this is how I thought about myself.
So that's progress.
So that's progress, yeah. Yeah, and then the journaling also created some hurdles as well, because like how I was saying, I would reflect on some of the things I would write, and I would read some things that I felt were so insightful, and I would be like, oh my goodness, how can I ever write anything better than this? Right. And so then that ego game started where I was like, okay, now I got to top myself. Now I got to be more insightful. I got to be more creative. And so then that started a whole
But that's a good use of ego in some ways, because you're pushing yourself to get better.
I think so, but I think there's a difference between pushing myself to get better and allowing myself to be more authentic. And I feel like pushing myself to get better has the potential to warp the journey of being more authentic. Like I said earlier, authenticity is something that always is. It's always there.
Right.
It's just about allowing yourself to align with it. And so the journal is where the first place that started. And from the journal, it actually expanded into like my bedroom, my space. And it was in that space I felt very comfortable being who I was. And the memory that comes to mind to me is I love cloaks. I love wearing cloaks. You've seen me wear them before. Cloaks.
Okay.
So just like a giant cloth.
Cloak.
Yeah, like a giant scarf, like really big scarf. And you just wrap it around yourself in a way where you could have a hood or not, but just like it covers your whole body. And I always felt like that resonated with me internally, but I'd never feel comfortable wearing it outside of the house, let alone outside of the bedroom. I didn't want my family seeing me wearing this, but I would put the cloak on and I would just look at myself in the mirror and I would feel so good about it.
What version of yourself was it that you could see as authentic here and not authentic somewhere else? And you just described it perfectly.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick housekeeping question?
Yeah.
Because this journaling thing is really, it's a great thing. And what I'm wondering is, it's just a quick thing and we move on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to schedule, how did you make time to?
Every night.
You just said to yourself, I'm not going to sleep until I do this? Or did you skip a night? Does it matter?
It happened quite naturally. It happened quite naturally.
One night.
Every night.
Just started writing. That was it. And every night I do this.
Every night.
And what motivated you to keep on doing that? Because some nights, you're tired, you're sleepy, it was late, you got caught up in something.
It would meander, but I basically had two strategies. A lot of the time I actually spent journaling in my bed.
Okay.
So the journal would be on my pillow.
Okay.
So it's like I get in the bed, my journal's there.
Easy to access.
It was there. I eventually shifted from the upstairs bedroom to a basement bedroom that was a bit bigger, so I was able to have a desk. Right. My journal was open on the desk 24/7 with the pen clicked on. It was just as little friction as possible. Yeah, as little friction as possible. And there would be times where I'd crawl into bed and then realize I forgot to journal, and there'd be a 5-minute tassel where it's just go to bed. It's no, I can't.
Did you ever
can't.
skip a day here and there at first?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And there'd also be phases.
You kind of worked your way into it.
And there'd be phases where I would go months without journaling.
Okay.
And then I would journal about how I've gone months without journaling.
Okay.
And I started realizing there was a certain pattern that I would only journal when I was sad.
Yeah.
I would only journal when something was wrong and I needed to process something. And through that realization, I was like, well, journaling is such a beautiful thing. I don't want it to be just this.
Right.
And so from there, it took a little bit more effort, but then I was like, okay, let's just journal more regularly, even if things are good.
It's like eating broccoli.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what
I like broccoli.
Well, I didn't like broccoli growing
Yeah.
up, but I would think about it like that. It's journaling is like this effort at first. And it's like, I don't want to do it today. I'm tired. You make excuses, right? I would.
I think we do it with anything self-care related, though.
Mm-hmm.
We find great ways to self-sabotage our own care. We do with exercise, eating properly, journaling, sleeping properly,
true.
eating too much, drinking. We all do these things and engage in behaviors that are actually against our best interests, right?
Yeah.
So he caught himself.
So that's interesting because even though it wasn't perfect, it wasn't routine, there were breaks, you just stuck with it. It just kind of, okay, thank you for that. That was something I wanted to understand. Now you start touching on the next thing that I find interesting. You're already getting there is that the expansion of who you are. And you already started talking about it by going from one size room to a larger area. So your pond and who you are grows, right? And then eventually, now you can be more comfortable to be now your authentic self, and be okay with it and confident outside that door of that basement, room of yours.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not so fussed about the time that it takes, but there are phases, clear phases.
Yeah.
You went from a smaller space, you felt you need a large space. At what point in time, and I don't mean time as in, a number, but at what when did you feel, when do you feel that you go, I'm ready to now go outside the other side of that door?
Yeah.
What was the thought that led to that? I'm curious now. So now you're going outside of these zones now.
Yeah.
You're breaking through these zones.
Yeah.
Well, did it happen in a moment, or did it happen just kind of like gradually?
The first thing I'd love to bring clarity to is that transition from the smaller room to the bigger room. It didn't quite happen like that. There was a step in between as well. If you want to try to keep that metaphor intact, where I was in a smaller room upstairs with windows. And then I was moved into the basement, which was the smallest room with no windows. Okay. So my family had the joke, we called it the dungeon. I lived in the dungeon. Really? It was pitch black all the time. Sure. Very cramped space, not much room for anything other than sleep. And so that's where I felt most confined. And I feel that's where a lot of internal exploration took place. And that's where a lot of my journaling in bed took place. Because
I was about to ask you, just out of curiosity, your journalism increase.
Yeah.
Journaling,
yeah.
You know, at that point in time. So you move into a less comfortable space. And that starts.
So was the desk that was in the other room then?
That was in the third room that I eventually moved to.
So interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like the and then.
Never a straight line. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
But that's everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
So carry on. Yeah. So thanks for clarifying that. And then now at this point in time here, you're now. You've been journaling for a while.
You got your cloak.
You got your cloak. I like that. The cloak, that's the chapter.
Yeah.
Wonder Bread, the cloak. Okay. I like it. This is a great book.
Yeah.
And so now you're ready to go. What's the next chapter? What are you going to call it?
I don't know, but definitely wasn't ready. And it wasn't a conscientious choice that was made. Once again, it felt like it was more out of necessity. It was just or maybe more out of circumstance. It was just transition of life taking place. And I was like, here's your new environment. Everything's now new. This is when I moved out of my brother's house back to my parents' house in Fort Erie, which was even a smaller space, but bigger space outdoors. So it was like smaller space internally, but more space with nature and trees and bigger backyard and all that stuff, which felt nice.
But where was your state of mind? Like, where did you feel like transition moving?
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah, there's a huge wave of anxiety. That's when I started realizing that I experienced anxiety. To me, anxiety was this very foreign thing that I didn't think happened to me. And then I realized anxiety has been happening to me all this time. And it just like culminated, it came to full bloom when I moved to my parents' house, waking up in the middle of the night, super nauseous, feeling like puking, just heart racing, like I don't know what's happening here. And then I spoke to a friend who has a lot of anxiety. She's like, yeah, you're just having an anxiety attack. And then I did a little bit of research into it, and it's just like, yeah, changes of environment can cause anxiety. And it was also what was attached with those changes.
So hearing this, I feel like it's like another version of what happened when you were 21. Like but this time you're like what, by this age, 20?
This would have been 26, 27, so this is later.
Okay, so interesting, because I've heard about these cycles, like 7-year cycles. Have you heard about this 7-year cycles?
Yeah.
So here it is. I'm seeing it again.
Yeah.
It happens with me too. So it's interesting that no matter how you time it or who you are,
it all happens.
Yeah.
So after all of this building up your tools, now you have more. You're aware that you have more. You never had anxiety attacks before.
Yeah.
But now you're having anxiety attacks.
Yeah.
When you have more tools.
Yeah.
Isn't that like that's such a curious thing?
The anxiety attacks were always there. I just didn't recognize them as anxiety. I didn't know what it was. And so I didn't have the verbiage to kind of like label it, to then categorize it, to then eventually process and integrate it. So these things were happening, but they were just happenings. Yeah. There was nothing I could do about them. They just were things that took place.
And oftentimes with anxiety, you, I'm not saying this is your perception, but I know for many people, is when they have moments of anxiety, it's usually because you did this, or you didn't do this, or you created this situation, and that discomfort you have is because of someone else not doing something, or not doing something up to par, or creating a circumstance. But really, it's our anxiety around the situation that is then projecting that onus onto the other person. So that probably came out from your journaling. You probably saw that, the anxiety come out.
Yeah, and it allowed me to kind of start to label it and to understand it. Like, I feel like that's what started happening when I moved back to my parents' house. Like, the strong feeling about moving back to my parents' house is, I think in any person's life, it feels like a step backwards. You know, even though I was living with my brother, I wasn't like, you know, out on my own, but there was a sense of separation. And now I retracted that. And so there was a sense of failure that came with that all of a sudden.
And now another thought, you got to do something.
And I got to do something.
So this I got to do something comes up again and again and again.
Yeah.
And in spite of your progress that you're making, you're looking back on yourself and being like, what have you actually done?
Yeah.
Yet you had all these, like, you're growing. So it's possible, okay, that somebody's growing and not feeling the growth.
100%.
Okay, well, that's an important thing to understand.
Yeah.
Don't you think? Like, somebody's growing, you're okay.
Yeah.
How do you tell a person who doesn't feel that they're growing that you're okay?
Yeah.
How do you tell somebody that?
You did it when we spoke about earlier today, when the person that you had the conversation with, that you said, I don't know why they're so grateful for what I did. All I did was tell them that they're doing a great job and affirmed all their skills. But people don't always have that internal self-talk, right? So when they hear someone else from like a system perspective say something like that, that can create a shift sometimes.
So there's, again, the value of ourselves being put in control of someone outside ourselves.
Right. Instead of looking
And again, that's a
internal.
choice.
100%.
Crazy. So, okay, now, you see all of this now looking back?
Yeah.
So is that now what, like, that's what I love about where you are, because now you're at this point, right, that you've seen all of these things. Honest question.
Yeah.
Do you still ever sometimes feel, I got to do something? That same, where am I? I'm not there where I want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
But is your reaction with the same level of, you know, despair?
Volatility? No, definitely not.
Okay.
Definitely not. Now there's a lot more of space created between the thought and the emotional reaction to the thought. It gives me that time to process it and mitigate the emotional volatility of how I would tend to respond. You know, before I'd be scribbling on the page and how I'm worthless and I'm never going to be anything and all this kind of stuff. Whereas now it's like, these are valid feelings. It's okay that you're having these thoughts. These are the reasons why you're having these thoughts. And these are the feelings that are coming up around these thoughts. So let's sit with it for a little bit. There's no reason to want them to go away or anything, because my experience has been the more you want to push something away, it tends to have the opposite response. So it's like, just sit with it. It's whatever it is you're feeling, that's what you're supposed to be feeling. So sit with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's interesting, because as far as you've come, and we all have our own distances that we cover. It's our journey, right? Come a long way. You don't let go of this journaling that you do.
It's like a relationship with a really good friend. You could go without a year without seeing each other, but when you meet again, it's like you pick up like you've never left. So there's never a concern with me about losing journaling.
Okay, so you don't feel like you have to do it every night.
Exactly.
For example.
I don't feel like if I don't do it on a regular basis that I'm gonna, not get a call back from my journal. You know, it never feels like that. There's always that sense of security in that relationship that it's gonna be there when I need it to be there. And so that allows me to be authentic in my journal rather than, I gotta journal, because if I don't journal today, then I won't journal tomorrow, and then I'm gonna lose this skill.
When you look back on your journal, you've done it repeatedly.
Yeah.
Now, are you getting like different sort of perspectives than you even had when you looked at the same moment, but when you did that in your past?
Yeah.
Are there new things coming out constantly, or is it like you look at it and you're like, okay, that was that, and I don't need to look at it again?
No, it comes up a lot, and sometimes I would review the same things and have different perspectives on them, just constantly shifting. And I guess like one of the developments is in my earlier journals, in my earlier writing, it was a lot of punchlines. It was a lot of like one sentences, zingers, just try to like capture it all in one sentence. Whereas now it's a lot more expressive and flowing in the emotion and just following a journey as I go along in that process. And so that's been a really interesting thing for me, because it kind of felt like before it was like a single tree that was planted, and now it feels like I'm planting forests at a time.
Nice. I
right?
like that
So it's
image.
like,
That is a good one.
yeah.
So 2 things I'm going to ask you, like, to wrap up on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, highlights to me in this conversation are you gotta do something.
Mm-hmm.
I keep hearing you say that at a couple of different phases.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, I'm going to call it the stick.
Yeah.
If there's a carrot in a stick, that's the stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you got to do something.
Yeah.
And then there is the non-judgmental writing,
Mm-hmm.
which is, the carrot to me. It's like, it's all just like, it's going to be okay. Just write it.
Yeah.
So if you're talking to yourself, right,
Mm-hmm.
out there and looking back,
Mm-hmm.
I could ask you what's next, but, you think about that, first of all? Like,
What's next
for Ari?
I think, doesn't everyone, not about me, but
Well,
doesn't everyone think about what's next for them?
For some time, you talk about this, actually, that if you were thinking about what's next, because when I touched on planning before, you backed off from planning. So I said, I'm going to bring that up again.
Yeah.
But as much as we plan, we often look back at it and go, what the heck were you thinking?
Yeah.
Like, how immature, right? So I'm not going to ask you that, because I think I know what you're going to say. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's very standard, I feel like, as we grow. We're like, oh, that was cute. That's also a sign of progress.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is now, really, a lot of people, I feel, don't make that same choice. And you talked about how it's a choice, right? It's a total choice. You had to choose.
Conscious or unconscious. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that helps the choice is, to me, I always find it's the carrot and the stick. So it's like, what do you say to somebody who says, because your situation, anyone could look at from another perspective and go, hopeless. I don't have the tools. You said it yourself.
Yeah.
Or you have so many tools. I see it as he had lots of tools.
Well, that's
but
what you see.
Didn't capitalize on.
That's
them,
what
right?
you see.
So, like,
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally. Everyone would know now. You acknowledge it, that you have everything it takes.
Oh, yeah.
I already believe that about everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the people that are there at that moment, including yourself when you were there.
Mm-hmm.
I was there.
And it's the
you were there.
authenticity is like, how I keep asking questions, so he's not speaking, but it's how do you align with your authenticity in your life now? Because when you align with your authenticity, you're going to invite things that resonate more with you as an individual. And being authentic isn't always something that we can capitalize on, for lack of a better word, but it brings value to our life in different ways, whether it be work or in relationships. So like coming from your cloak to the authenticity and seeing the authenticity as really the pillar of what you were lacking, because we get sad and upset and depressed and anxious when we're not authentic to ourselves. So what are the tidbits, or what are the lessons you learned in bringing that authentic self from the dark room to the outside the door?
I think the core, to me, the most important aspect of it is that you're never going to, or I don't want to say you're never going to, I realized that I was never going to achieve my authentic self through consuming culture and consuming media and through watching what other people are doing. Like how we pointed out earlier, journaling is just something that happened because I guess at that time it needed to happen for me in the way that it happened. And I feel like that's where the birth of recognizing my authenticity began. It's not like somebody said, hey, you should try journaling.
Yeah.
It was, I need to get this out of me right now. And I can't draw, and I can't make music, but I know how to spell. So let me just start writing.
And even if it's going to be
illegible.
So the shift is, instead of talking and listening to others, you're talking and listening to yourself.
Yeah.
So how was that received when you presented your authentic self outside of that room?
They want you talking to yourself. They want you listening to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta listen to them,
Yeah.
right?
I feel like I haven't done that too much, to be completely honest. I feel like there's still a lot of things kept behind the veil. I definitely feel I'm honest and authentic, but it feels like the rawness of my authenticity is still veiled. This is kind of off of side note, but I'd just love to share one of the last things I was journaling about. I feel like that'd be pretty cool.
Tell us.
Basically, what I wrote down was that music, and you could replace music with art, writing, any form of creative expression, but I use the word music. Music is medicine for the creator and a drug for everyone else. And what I realized, and the reason why that thought came to me, is that to truly heal through the creative expression, it has to be your own, because it's kind of like, you know, when you're putting a key into the lock, somebody else's art, somebody else's creation, it might hit some of those pistons and it might lift a few of them, but if you want to actually open that lock, you have to create the key yourself. And so I realized that through listening to the music of others and observing their art and reading their books, it would give me a high, it would give me a feeling as if something's really changing, but then I realized nothing's really changing. And it was only through my own creative expression that I started to feel that progress was being made.
That's profound, man. I love how you articulated that. It makes so much sense, and as he's describing lifting pistons, I'm thinking you're right. You can listen to everybody else's music, but you gotta kind of make your own.
Yeah, if you want to open that door, yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
I'm gonna do this again with you, just with a coffee though, not on a microphone.
Sure.
I'm just saying, this is great. I'm having fun doing